I'm Loki Karuna, and this is TRILLOQUY, the podcast built to decolonize classical music through dialogue. Thanks so much for tuning in. So as I continue my work with the American Composers Forum, which is keeping me quite occupied, I've naturally been thinking a lot about this notion of America as I speak to from time to time here on the show. When I think about those uniquely American musical aesthetics and stories that I try to highlight and center in our reinvestigation of this phrase classical music, the tradition of wind band always comes to mind. Of course, wind band and music for winds definitely predates the United States, but there's no question that band has an American flavor, that has evolved over the years is something that you don't see in many other parts of the world, certainly not throughout arts ecosystems. It's one of those difficult things to actually engage because there are a couple of professional wind bands out there. I'm thinking of the Dallas Wind Symphony, for example, and there's a famous one in Japan, the Kosei Tokyo Wind Band, I believe it is. But, it's not the same to commission or really get some engagement with these ensembles because they're fewer and far between. There are some really great ones at colleges and some conservatories, but largely, if you want to get that professional perspective on wind band music and wind band performance, you have to look at the military. All of that to introduce someone I'm very pleased to feature on this opus of TRILLOQUY. His name is Cedric Mayfield. Cedric is a phenomenal clarinetist and a recently retired member of the United States Coast Guard Band. Now, as a society, we're generally taught to thank veterans for their service because, well, that's just what we're supposed to do, right? They're supposed to get on the airplane first, all of that, just because it's something we're conditioned to sort of think about and engage in many ways. But today I have to offer gratitude from a place of genuine gratitude in a way that rings for me personally. Growing up, especially in the South, wind band commands massive respect. Anybody who was at the University of Memphis during my era knows that you did not show up late or unprepared to wind ensemble. That was the premier ensemble over the orchestra, over any of it. So for me and for many other young musicians, it was the high level professional recordings from military bands that served as the reference point and as the blueprint for how we prepared for rehearsals, how we practiced, and in some cases, what we would end up doing for a living. We didn't have the New York Philharmonic's recordings or that sort of thing, of wind band literature, because that's just not what those institutions do. So it really was those military ensembles that paved the way and as I said, served as the blueprint for what we were supposed to be doing with our instruments. My performance career, of course, was with orchestras, but Cedric and his colleagues literally provide the soundtrack to the musical development of countless young musicians. So I say with my full chest to the military musicians, thank you for your service. In this episode, Cedric and I pull back the curtain a little bit on what it means to be an artist in the armed forces. We talk about some of the harsh realities of the job, like navigating government shutdowns where musicians have to play without pay. And we also get into the overarching issue of the arts, representation. This is something that is even an issue in military bands, as you will hear. I think Cedric mentioned out of about 25,000 people in the Coast Guard, there are only about 55 musicians. And Cedric talks about the reality of being one of the few, if not the only, Black person in the room within that minority of a minority within the broader Coast Guard. Anyway, I'm really thrilled and really honored to have the opportunity to share this with you, to have had a chat with Cedric, and hope you get something out of this. I can't remember if it made it onto the recording, but Cedric and I share the University of Memphis as a school we both went to. So I'm going to celebrate the U of M to get us into my chat with Cedric with a recording that I've held on to over the years. Craig Williams is leading the University of Memphis Wind Ensemble here in an excerpt from a work called Ecstatic Waters, music by composer Stephen Bryant. More for me on the other side.
During my career, I became significantly more aware as what you said just now became much more prevalent. Initially, in my inception in military bands, I didn't realize how how widely reaching those recordings were, how impactful they were. I didn't know. I learned a lot along the way. So by the time I got into it, I began to realize how important those recordings were to a wide array of people for many reasons.
And recording is something that so many institutions simply can't afford to do. When we start talking about the fiscal side of things, especially in this nonprofit sector, so many institutions are pinching pennies, but that is not the case for the United States military, for for better or for worse. I wonder how you sort of balance or reconcile the security of being an artist within the military versus what the military is to so many people as a violent institution, maybe even an institution that has historically marginalized Black folks.
And the tentacles on this are wide and many, and it goes so very deep, which is in part why I wanted so much to have this conversation with you so that we could peel open layers of this and really see inside.
Hmm.
Because there are many people who only see military bands through certain lenses and certain perspectives and draw conclusions without a better knowledge of how they work and why they work and who's involved. And there's so many ways to answer this question. One, that security isn't always secure.
Oh.
From time to time, bandsmen in all the service bands around the country, around the world, face some issues as a result of the government working or the lack thereof.
Mm.
Just now, in the last month, the Coast Guard band in particular was hit with a long-standing government shutdown that involved Department of Homeland Security. And as we've learned over the last 8 years or so, uh, whenever those government shutdowns hit, everybody sees it on the news and they see what Congress did or did not agree to, and as such, these things hit. That immediately hits everybody in the service, including the musicians. And unfortunately, unlike our civilian counterparts, where they can just be like, okay, well, we'll just go on strike or not perform, we're then told, you coming to work tomorrow and every day thereafter, despite the shutdown. So we still got to show up. We still got to do what we do. And it's odd because in light of the fact that in a shutdown, we still have to show up for work, despite the fact that there is no work because the bands aren't allowed to perform during a shutdown, mainly for optics.
Hmm.
So that then becomes a time where we have to show up for work and create work to do something. And a lot of times that's where those recordings come from. Because we just there, locked in the building. So what are we gonna do with this time? All right, we're gonna set up some mics and we're gonna record these pieces and these marches, or we're gonna run this back and tighten it up, or just utilize that time in such a way that it is valuable and some kind of necessary work can get done. And sometimes when those shutdowns have happened, pay is halted,
Mm.
and sometimes it is not. And so, no matter what the situation, all those people, all those soldiers, sailors, Marines, Coast Guardsmen, airmen, they got to show up to work, pull their horn out, whether they're getting paid or not, whether the gigs are canceled or not. We're obligated to be there. And so that's that one facet of that. Now, with that said, also by comparison to our civilian counterparts, our job feels much more secure in that it's not likely we're going to show up and something will happen that removes that ensemble altogether. It's unlikely, but it has happened. It does happen. It's happening right now. There's some Air Force bands that are on the chopping block just
Wow.
because the Air Force is now going through a regular, recurring reshaping of the forces. And usually, when those people sit at the long tables somewhere and make decisions, they start looking at things on paper. Well, what are these things? Oh, these bands are costing us how much? Yeah, get rid of those. Like in the blink of an eye, without really talking about what impact that's going to have.
Right.
That immediately impacts 50, 80, 110 people who are then going to either have to get out of the service or find something else to do within the service. Or if they're lucky enough, the service will restructure the other ensembles within that service so that there's room for those other people to go into if they're going to shut down an entire ensemble altogether. A lot of those things happen. For the Coast Guard band, it's only the one ensemble. The Coast Guard only has one band. So it's not likely they're going to walk into a room and shut that down because that would be cataclysmic.
Mm-hmm.
But for Air Force bands, Army bands, where there's satellite bands all around the country, all around the world, those get picked at from time to time and sometimes just dumped off the map, just like that. And it's a hard thing to swallow. Nobody from the Philadelphia Orchestra is going to come in one day and read an email that says this ensemble is being disbanded in 90 days. That's just not going to happen. But they have their issues. We have ours.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, that's some very important perspective. You're making me think. A few years ago now, I interviewed a woman named Shayna Rush, who was a member of the Old Guard Fife and Drum Corps, and I believe she was the first Black member of it. And she was talking about how, for ceremonial purposes, that ensemble was safe simply because how could you have a presidential inauguration, a parade, without that particular ensemble? Of course, that's very different than the various military bands. I wonder, and I almost hesitate to ask. I don't want you to say anything that might, get you in trouble with the powers that be or anything. But I'm just curious, how necessary are you regarded among your fellow airmen, your fellow Coast Guard members? Is being in a band in the military respected as much as being a pro level marksman or whatever other things that you can really develop as a service member?
Of course. The short answer to that is no, not very well respected at all. And I say that with it's a very broad scope. Like this isn't a very straight black and white no. It's a
Sure.
no, but it's not everyone. But with that said, it's within every service, the musicians are a very small niche part of that service. For example, in the Coast Guard, uh, there are literally only 55 musicians in all of the Coast Guard.
Wow.
When there are, I don't know the exact number, so forgive me for quoting erroneously, but there are 25,000 people in the Coast Guard, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
But there's 55 of us. And so even when people go through basic training and they're learning all about the whole service and they have to learn what all the rates are, it's all the jobs. They go down that list and they see musician. Oh, we have those? Oh, okay. And somebody tells them, yeah, you'll never see those guys. So, and it's true. By and large, there are many people who get into the Coast Guard and have whole careers and get out and never see the Coast Guard band. They never meet a musician in the Coast Guard. So we are kind of these rare birds of sorts in that a lot of what we do, especially as the only band in the Coast Guard, a lot of what we do has to do with high level functions, with high ranking officials, uh, political officials. We go on tour and see the public at large.
Mm-hmm.
But only in very rare instances do we encounter the rest of the service. And so sometimes when we do encounter them, they're like, oh, there goes one of them. And I can't shade them for that because they're kind of right. Like they may have seen me that one time and they'll never see me again. It's just the
Mm-hmm.
nature of what we do. Very rarely do we cross paths with boatswain's mates who go out on ships for weeks and months at a time, or MKs or the people who do all kinds of jobs in the Coast Guard. Very rarely do we cross with them. We love to because we're out. Part of what we do is going out to the public and telling their story. So when we get to encounter them, it's great to be able to connect the faces with what it is we do when we go on tour or when we have concerts, because now we can make a personal connection with the people whom their story we're telling. So that's always nice. But in every service, it never fails. There's always some people like, oh, he's one of the bad guys. It never fails.
I mean, when I think about my time in school and hearing about people getting a spot in the Air Force band, that was a coveted thing. So my sense, unless I'm wrong, would be that with there being so fewer musicians in the United States Coast Guard, that would be even more competitive, even more of a coveted position.
Uh, yes and no. Like when I went into Air Force bands first, and at the time when that opportunity came to me, I was like, not no, but hell no. I wanted no parts of being in a military band whatsoever. I was like most everyone else at a school on a track to be a classical musician. That's what we do. We go in, we do the thing, we get out, we go hunt for auditions.
Yeah.
And so when the opportunity for being in a military band presented itself, yeah, you should come audition. I was like, yeah, no, I'll pass. But luckily, my teacher at the time had other plans for me, and luckily he did because that decision then changed the trajectory of my life. And as a shameless stop and plug, real quick, just to share with those who will listen, Loki, unbeknownst to him, he and I share a similar path, and that I spent my graduate studies at the University of Memphis, and
Oh
I
wow.
probably just missed you because when I got there, Lacolian and his wife had just arrived, and so I spent a little bit of time with him. I was studying with James Golson, and I don't think you
Oh
got to
yeah.
cross paths with him when you were
Oh, of
there.
course, of course. Yeah, he's a Memphis
That's my
legend.
guy. I love the general to death. I felt fortunate to be able to study with him, and it was kind of haphazard because I was before I went to grad school. I was on tour with a musical, and we stopped in Memphis for a week, and I was taking advantage of that tour and auditioning for grad school while I was on tour, and I got to meet him, he left a lasting impression. And when the tour was over, I got to communicate with them and the University of Memphis, and they brought me in as a grad student. And I loved my time there. It was awesome. And to my knowledge, someone fact check me and please send the info to Loki. I believe that Dr. Golson was the first Black principal clarinet player in an orchestra in the United States.
Certainly in Memphis, but likely across the whole United
He
States
says
as
no
well.
because the Memphis Symphony was not a full-fledged orchestra at the time that he got in.
I see.
But I say, look, you was the first. Whether they call it fully functioning and standing or not, you were number one.
And that can get me down a whole nother rabbit trail about only in retrospect do I appreciate the degree to which I got to engage Black professionals in music as an undergraduate. There are so many people who never see a Black teacher, but me not only studying bassoon with Lacolian, of course, I had many interactions with Dr. Golson through the various practicum courses and that sort of thing. I always shout out a woman named Nicole Robinson, who was my primary music education teacher. There are others that I can name, but I love that we share that school in common. I actually was just at a an alumni event here in New York, and most of the alumni who showed up were music folks. So the University of Memphis has definitely carved its path and made a name for itself in the industry. But before we
Right.
get a little bit more into your background, just one more sort of broad question. Both of my parents were in the Air Force. That's where they met many years ago. I was born just off of an Air Force base
Nice.
in Spain, in Torrejon.
Okay.
Those bases aren't there anymore. But
Mm-hmm.
I have aunts and uncles, that were in the Air Force. Two of my siblings were in the Air Force, so I come from a military family in that way. And what I recognize is that it's a more viable option for so many Black folks than being that first generation college student, college graduate like I was, really going into the debt. My siblings that were in the Air Force, they don't have the student loan debt that I have. They don't have all that other drama that we go through as college students, so it just seems like such a viable path. I wonder how you think about the sort of almost paradox of the military bands, military music being such a viable path for black folks, for black musicians, next to professional orchestras, still to this day, most of them having no black people in them. I wonder how do you think about that sort of dynamic?
This is one of those situations where two things can be true at the same time. You're very right in that it is a a lane in which black musicians have more ready access to getting into that kind of job, those kinds of ensembles, because the opportunity is there and they're less likely to meet the barriers that they would meet with civilian counterparts. With that said, there are still some strange barriers. And I got to say, as I continue to answer this question, I've spent most of my career being blind
Mm.
to those barriers. And so I'm very thankful for things like TRILLOQUY that just is a fountain of information and people sharing their stories and helping to remove the gunk off my lenses. Stuff was happening all around us, plain as day, for years and years, and I just never knew. I just didn't see it because my head was so far up a clarinet. I was focused on going right here and nowhere else and getting it in and getting it done. But there's yeah, both things are true. It's a great avenue, but there's also some weird barriers. And frankly, one of the things that Adam Sandberry and I talked about in our couple of discussions, I had this plan in my mind that when I retired, I was going to move back home to Houston. And one of the things I wanted to do was address this thing because I've sat on a number of audition panels. And it started to become clear to me in the latter part of my career that there's not very many people of color in these ensembles.
Hmm.
And then there's not very many people of color showing up at these auditions or winning these auditions. Then there's not very many showing up. And so I started to ask myself, well, what's going on here? What's at the root of this? And so I started digging only to find out that, I was going digging to another hole that led to another hole. So just wanting to figure out what is causing this and how do we fix this. Turns out that's been a big problem for decades beyond me, and it's the one that we're all still trying to figure out. But I one of the conclusions I came to is that if I need to be part of the solution, I want to make myself available to young black music students so that they can one know about these auditions, which turns out that's part of the problem. Many don't know, and two, many aren't prepared, even if they knew. So now to get these things and make that a non sequitur sandwich, that they can become knowledgeable of these opportunities and be prepared when they get there. That's what I wanted to do. And so I tried to make myself available to some HBCUs who will remain nameless, only to run into the wall of tradition, and
Right.
that they're not really bringing those music students in to come to those kind of opportunities. They're bringing them in to do marching band and be music ed majors. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that, but I'm also saying that being able to sit on this side of the table, my people aren't showing up for these auditions. So we can't complain about the low representation, but also not send people to take part in representation. One of those has to change. And I want to help be part of that change. I want them to know that these opportunities are there, that military bands are good jobs. There's fantastic. The level of musicianship is raising and raising as the years go by. These ensembles are great. There's great musicians. There's people coming out of colleges, conservatories all across the country, ending up in these ensembles. They sound great. There's good conductors. There's good people. It's good pay with benefits. I mean, there's a lot of win. But I would also tell them, like any job, there's always some mess. There just is. If you going in the military, they know that you're going in the military, and there's
Right.
required of you as such. But also on the 1st and 15th, you solid. But also TRICARE healthcare for military is not perfect, but boy is it nice
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
there are people around the country who are struggling because of either very expensive healthcare or the lack thereof. There are great playing opportunities. There are opportunities to travel the world and make music. There's a lot going for those kinds of ensembles and for people who dedicate a significant amount of time of their life practicing and learning and doing all these and want to consider going a route but don't know that that's a route. They just look at this wide field of there's just professional orchestras and ensembles that I'll probably never be able to get a part of, so I'll just do something else. That feels unfair to me, especially given the career that I had. I want to be able to share that with people who want to consider another avenue. And frankly, I know of people who've gone into military ensembles and then thereafter have won orchestral jobs.
Sure, me
So
too. Yeah.
it doesn't mean that you go in and you're just sucked into the vortex and canceled out. But it is a great way to go. Is there every now and then signing bonuses show up or the college loan repayment. So we're talking about college loans. That's another great opportunity to maybe get that wiped up or greatly reduced while you figure out your next move. So there are lots of pluses for sure. But there's also, like every job, there's some mud you're gonna walk through.
I mean, and I definitely want to highlight that because for me, even as an undergraduate, I was aware. It felt like a dream to me to be able to dedicate a career specifically to band literature. Not just playing in an orchestra. That's fine. I served my my country in that way. I always joke playing in orchestras, but really diving into our classics and the conversation of composer diversity aside, I'm thinking about um, Percy Granger's Lincolnshire Posy, that is just so foundational. You have these pieces, Molly on the Shore. I'm remembering the works of David Maslanka and Philip Spark that you just don't see realized in that way outside of military bands or the few big schools around the country who really have some band programs that are really going. But I was, I've worn locks for, almost 20 years now. I was not about to cut my hair. If I'm gonna be quite honest, for me, there were still those don't ask, don't tell concerns that were floating around. So, while it does and is, I'll say a very incredible opportunity, there are also just those real life aspects, and there are real life aspects, I'll say, with any job. Some people have to wear a suit and tie to work every day. Some people don't get to work from home. That there's certain things you have to fit into when you talk about employment. But I will certainly affirm from my end the great opportunity it seems to be. I wonder, you mentioned being from Houston. When I think about the state of Texas, I think about that as the band state. I mean, what they tell us is that if, as a high school student, if you make all state in Texas, you're probably going to do something in music, or make a career out of yourself. I wonder how you stacked up in that way coming up as a musician in Texas.
Funny you ask. So I started out at an arts magnet in Houston, where I learned to play clarinet. Burris Elementary, shout out to Burris, which I recently heard, unfortunately, is likely going to get shut down.
Hmm.
And it is one of the few arts magnet elementary schools in the city. So to have it removed is very disheartening. And my guess is that it is for infrastructure as they continue to build more condos, which is really unfortunate. I can't confirm or deny the reason, but it'll be unfortunate for that to go because that's where I got my start.
Yeah.
Right in Houston Independent School District, Burris Elementary School, where at the time I started playing clarinet in second grade. So I I didn't know what I didn't know, of course, we are so young. But it turned out that the old man who was running the band program, Mr. Sam Harris, I heard him after school. I was after school hanging out, and he pulled out an alto and started playing, and it was like nothing I'd ever heard before.
Hmm.
I remember that sound to this day. I was like, wow, that's kind of cool. But then there was nothing of it. I just kept on moving. I later found out that he was like an OG, that he had played with like the Basie band once upon a time in his day. That he did some real stuff, and then he came back to Houston to teach people like me. I didn't find out till after the fact. So that was that. And then And then my mom picked us up and moved us out to the far west side of Houston because she didn't really want me coming up uh, in H Town the way
Sure.
that a lot of people do. So we went out to the burbs where I went to this all white junior high. Um, and then, but at the time, I didn't, again, my blinders were like this. I didn't see I didn't see the totality of that. I didn't see what that really meant. I had white friends, I had black friends. Uh, I went from being in that school in HISD where it was all black kids to going to a school in Spring Branch where it was all white kids. I was the only black kid in the band, but I didn't see that. It didn't matter to me. I was just there. I was just happy to be playing clarinet. And it turned out that I was better than everybody else, which was a surprise to me. But at that time, I didn't know what that meant. I just
Sure.
thought, well, this is fun. We can play. And I had really supportive teachers because that could have gone another way. You go to the wrong program with the wrong kind of teacher who maybe has something against color or maybe something against you, and they shut that down.
That's right.
But I had teachers who were very supportive and helped push me. And then I got into high school and I was still the only black kid. And again, I didn't see it. And then I got in the Houston Youth Symphony and I was like one of two. And again, I went my whole career not really realizing that. Um, and the power of that. I just never saw it for what that was. Maybe I was sheltered. Maybe I just was, my mom's brought me up to just not even look at that kind of stuff. To just, this is what you want to do, focus on that. Go get it, put in the work. It doesn't matter who's next to you, leave them by. So to answer your question, I had auditioned to get into HSPVA, the School of Performing Arts, uh, for high school. And I got in, but I told my mom I wanted to play football instead. And she was like, "Are you sure?" And I was like, "Yeah, yeah, I want ball." So she was like, "Okay." So I went to Stratford Senior High School, playing football and being in the band, and the rest is history. And now I look back going, man, I wonder what things would have been like if I went to HSPVA,
Yeah.
where all these people come out of from Houston, so many great musicians, and I would have been right there with them at that time. But the Lord works the way He works, and now I went the path that I went, and here we are having this conversation.
But I'm sure you weren't the only black person on that football team.
Was one of three,
Oh wow, even so.
me and my boys. And again, that even I didn't see that until I got closer to graduation and some weird things were happening.
Hmm.
And that's when I began to realize, oh, okay, maybe there is some weird stuff going on. And so, yeah, I ended up I never auditioned for Allstate because it was during football season.
I see.
So I just bypassed it because it didn't mean anything to me at the time. I knew that I could play. I just played for fun, and Allstate was like, yeah, whatever. I'm trying to make state for football. So all that stuff I just let bypass me, unbeknownst to me how important that would have been. But again, I'm fortunate to have been blessed to travel the road that I have traveled, to end up working in the Air Force bands or Coast Guard bands, sitting next to those same people who made Allstate 1, 2, 3 years in a row.
That's right. That's right. And you see, going back to Memphis, in Memphis, you will never be the only one and the only black person, only person of color in a room, even when it comes to bassoon. That everybody who's listened to this podcast knows I studied with a black man, but there were always black folks in the bassoon studio. I was never the only black person, so that's never gonna be the reality for you in Memphis, or certainly not for me. My awakening came when I started getting into the field. I started winning jobs, especially as after grad school when I joined the Detroit Symphony. That's when I started to see, oh, so it is just some people's reality to be the only one in a room. So my upbringing next to that reality is those two things coming together is what framed my trajectory beyond orchestras, just really trying to solve for this problem, because it was normal for me to be around black folks making music in a very on a high level. Not to compare myself at all to Martin Luther King Jr., but I always think about his story as well. What people don't realize is that he grew up in a black neighborhood that had black grocery stores had a black fire department. There was black wealth. All so when he went out into the rest of the world and saw that just was not the reality, that's what fueled his activism as well.
Mhm.
When I think about those things in relation to your story, it seems like being, you know, in predominantly white spaces for so long must have prepared you for your career in a military band in a weird way.
Very much so, because that was always the case. It never changed. Even at one point, while I was at that Arts Magnet, I also did dance, ballet, tap, modern, and it was me and one other boy in there. Um, and even us, just in that setting, just being the only two dudes,
Yeah.
that was just my teacher was very supportive, and we were just the only two dudes, and that's what it was. But just being in constantly in all white ensembles, it never dawned on me until much later in my career, particularly post uh, pandemic, is when my eyes really started to open to this thing because I had nothing but time on my hands, and it left me with a lot to think about. And I started peeling that open, and it just started becoming more and more prevalent to me that one, I had been the only one for so long, it became my norm.
Mm.
And then that made me beg the question, why is that my norm? And why is that the norm for so many of us? And actually, during that time, I randomly reached out to a clarinet player named Latrell White, Dr. Latrell White. You
Hmm.
may know her.
Oh yeah.
That's my girl, represent Latrell. Uh, and I just was doing research and I was thinking about, my move coming back to Houston. I found that she was a clarinet player in the city. So I was like, hey, I just want to talk to you about what's going on down in H-Town on the scene. What do we have? So she and I talked at length about what was going on the scene here. And she was telling me some of her experiences, not only being the only Black person, but many times the only female.
Sure.
And I was like, wow, things I never really, really considered. So just getting my eyes open to that really helped me to start to go down the path of like, what can we do about this? Because it shouldn't be the case. Only to find out that for decades and decades, people have been ramming their head against this question, trying to find solutions. And I'm thankful for the people that did because it allowed me to be the only one many times over. And I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful for what Dr. Golson went through so that I could have the opportunity to be the only one sometimes because he damn sure was the only one.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
And thankful for that and he and others like him who went through what they went through and trained us. And simultaneously, especially when I went to Memphis, but even when I was at SMU from an undergrad, uh, I was always in those situations. But somehow or another, I always somehow found my way, just for lack of a better way to say it, back to some Blackness.
Hmm.
It was always nice. Like when I was in Houston, I was always the only one in those situations, but I went to a Black church.
Yeah.
And so just being able to plug into that was important for me as a person, spiritually and musically, because just being around Black musicians like that really informed my musicality, as it were. I learned a lot from those guys about rhythm, about form, about all the things that they don't even really talk about with the choir. They just do it because they can. None of them read music. They just did it. And so when they were explaining to me how this gospel song works and the form, and listening to the drummer create form and outline, and hearing the organ player do harmony, like asking him questions, and then going back to school and then sitting in rehearsal, listening to Mahler, and at first just being overwhelmed because I didn't understand, but then I started playing jazz, uh, and that really helped open my ears to classical. And so then when I really wanted to get into jazz, and there was none to be found at SMU where I was,
Hmm.
so then I started hanging out in Dallas. And lo and behold, there was more Black people, which is exactly what I needed. And so then they were schooling me, giving me info about how this works and listen to this guy and learn these songs and these tunes. And then I would apply that information to orchestral music and scores, and it just opened up for me. And I could just hear so much more. I could focus on things and like understand the larger picture of form, all thanks to jazz, which for some people that's not the case, but it helped me a lot. And mainly because people like Shelley Carroll, who was a staple in Dallas, a saxophone player, Jason Davis, Coman Fowler. There's so many cats in Dallas that just will feed me info directly and indirectly. And then I graduated from SMU and went on the road with a musical where I was the only one in the pit. There were a couple people in the cast, but we only connected so often because they were the cast and I was in the pit, and they did their thing. I did my thing. Then I went to University of Memphis, and like you said, you're never the only one,
Yep.
and that had a good feeling. Suddenly, I was like, oh, nice. Well, I mean, yes, like I welcome this because that was probably the first time in my musical career where that happened on a regular basis.
Hmm. Yeah.
And then not for a while since.
Yeah, and and I think that's a very important point to make about finding that community. I think we all need that. However our identities shake up, women need to find their people in male dominated spaces. Black people need to find our people in non-black dominated spaces. And I would say, of course, for your mental health and all of that, but also the artistry. I don't know what type of musician I would be if I didn't grow up in a city where not just jazz but the blues was just in on the periphery. Everywhere you went, that was just kind of in your ear. I practice Buddhism now, but growing up in the church played a vital role in my ear training. The way that I play in tune. I connect to those experiences. So I would argue there's also that artistic side, that artistic importance to finding those communities as well, even if you have to look outside of your institutions. To get us back to the military band, just for general framing, I wonder if you could talk about the audition process. Does the military decide you can play, and then you go to BT? Do you sign up for the military, and music happens once you're already in? I wonder if you could go through that process.
That process happens in a lot of different ways, depending on the person and the opportunity that's at hand. For the premier ensembles, the ones in DC and the Coast Guard Band, which is in Connecticut, the Coast Guard Band and the Marines don't go to basic training upon winning the audition.
Okay.
The Air Force, the Navy, and the Army, they win the job and they go to basic. In fact, for the Army, before you audition for the Army band, they send you to MEPS first, so that if you win, then you've gotten through all that and you can just move on to the next step. But for the Coast Guard band, or the Marine band, if you win that audition, you report directly to the ensemble. You do a period of indoctrination, a couple weeks, and then you're off and running.
So you
But
did not go to basic training.
when I auditioned for the Air Force band, I did have to go to basic training. So I won that audition midway through my time at Memphis. And then I actually, right before I took that audition, was in a pretty bad car accident. So I ended up taking a leave of absence from Memphis and staying in Texas to recoup, where I was studying with my undergrad teacher to just get back on track with clarinet
Hmm.
before I came back to Memphis. And that's where an Air Force band woodwind quintet came and performed. We got to talking to him after, and he said, "You should come audition." I said, "No, thanks." And my teacher was like, "He'll be there." But I did end up going to basic training, for which I found myself being thankful, especially when I got in the Coast Guard. Because while at basic training in the Air Force, I met a gentleman named Sam Johnson. He was a saxophone player in the Air Force who had retired, but then stuck around to be the director of the basic training, like little marching band. There's a flight specifically that they have the Air Force trainees basically be a drum bugle corps for Air Force graduations. And
Hmm.
he runs that. And so he would always be very welcoming to the people that were in basic that were going to go on to be musicians in the Air Force because he was one himself and he understood. He also wrote us very hard because he
Sure.
ain't had nothing else to do. But him being a musician that was in the Air Force and being a black man was really helpful for me because he put me on game. He talked to me a lot about things high and low, what they would expect of me and what I should expect of myself and what to watch out for. He helped me out a lot. So when I walked through the door, I had him in my ear about how to represent and how to not get taken advantage of and what to be about so that I would avoid certain issues. And he was right because there were some people who came in who didn't get that talk and ran right smack dab into the stuff. So big shout out to Sam, who is still there. That I couldn't tell you how old he is, but he looks like he's our age. He's in impeccable shape. He looks great, and he practices still. He pulls his alto out and goes to town. And so people like that were really helpful in my trajectory going through basics. So when I got to the Coast Guard band, where they did not go to basic training, an ongoing thing that members in that band face is a certain lack of military discipline because they're just musicians fresh out of blah blah conservatory or
Sure.
university or fresh off the audition circuit and being thrown right into that and are having to learn on the fly about military bearing, about uniform dress, about how to address and salute officers, about what to do, all that stuff is stuff that you learn day in, day out, 24 hours a day in basic training. But here they come fresh out of Cincinnati Conservatory, like that's not it's not what we do. So they're having to learn that, and it takes a while. Some longer than others.
Does that get in the way? I mean, how does that shake? I understand, how that might shake down when it comes to certain officers being in a room, certain ceremonies that the band has to be a part of, but just as it relates to the general rehearsal and performance cycle, is that purely military training or lack thereof something that inhibits the musical side of things?
No, I think, and I'm let me preface that with all the answers that I'm giving, I'm more or less speaking for myself and not so much for the broader. But with this one, I think I can say for probably all musicians in military bands everywhere, we deal with the military stuff outside the doors. When we're coming to rehearsal hall, we're musicians. We can take a breath. We can just get into the music and be the musicians that we were trained to be, and enjoy playing Granger, you enjoy playing Maslanka, enjoy getting it in because that's what we're there to do. We're there in that room. We all have an understanding with each other. We're musicians, and this is what we do. This is what we worked hard for. This is what we're going for. But then we walk out that door. We got to button up and just be on the radar for what we're supposed to do outside that door.
Mhm. Mhm. Wow, wow. So it and we kinda touched on this earlier, when it comes to the lack of, a Black presence in professional orchestras, there are so many things that we've learned over the years, first of all, with our eyes, but also from the experiences of people not getting tenure because of certain things. There are so many violinists who I've spoken to who talk about how they were, in the finals for a concert master position. And, the folks just said, well, our audience isn't expecting someone who looks like you as concert master. So I don't know if we can move forward. Same on the conducting side. And I know to a lot of people that sounds like hyperbole. That sounds like something someone would make up. But those are the real stories. And the way that these orchestras are set up, that can happen because that's just the way things are. It seems like on the military side, meritocracy would play such a bigger role due to the rigidity of things. I wonder how you think about what the diversity in military ensembles looks like today, considering the strictness of all of these processes. It seems like, at least from my perspective, it would offer Black musicians more safety than not.
There is a little more safety with under this umbrella because without making it too verbose, uh, orchestras can get away with that. But in the military, there are some firewalls. Like at the end of the day, it is the military, the bigger picture. And so if stuff like that happens, there is a recourse that people can go to and say, hey, this happened, open an investigation. And there are a group of people in all branches of service that are going to adhere to that request. So it can happen, but when people do that, they're taking a risk because the overarching powers that be could come in and shake that down. And so that there is some safety in that regard, in that it's not as prevalent as what goes on. Say for instance, what happened with the the Kansas City Orchestra. Like that kind of thing is not likely to happen in military bands, but it can.
Mm.
And in fact, it has. But it at some point, at some juncture, is going to get met with some level of resistance that it should, or at the very least, some form of reprimand, because everybody is supposed to follow a strict adherence to certain core values and things of that nature that are supposed to prevent those kinds of things from happening. That said, it still happens. And so the fight continues to help, at the very least, decrease the volume at which that happens, if not totally eliminate it, even in the military.
What about on the composer side of things? I know that when I first started away from orchestras and in radio in the mid 20 teens, people just didn't know the name William Grant Still. They had never heard the name Florence Price when I would say that. Of course, today that's more prevalent, and I would even say there's more of an emphasis on living composers, not just historical women composers or historical Black composers. What does that look like, or what did that look like in your experience? Was it just the people that the white men we mentioned, the Philip Spark, the David Maslanka, the Percy Granger, or did you see diversity on the composer side of things?
I was fortunate that there was some diversity coming from the podium in that regard. And I can't even really say that I can speak as to why. I just know that it began to occur and I appreciated it.
Hmm.
So when we started playing music by Omar Thomas
Yeah.
or Kevin Day, or getting their music on the stand, was like, all right, let's get it two times over because it's just necessary. And even a shout out to the people who are doing band arrangements of William Grant Still stuff, so that it can now come into that arena and not just be for orchestras. It was one thing for it to finally begin played by orchestras. It's another thing for wind ensembles to be getting those arrangements and then making that available to almost another sector, really. Because if those arrangements get into the right hands, there are kids who's going to play that music who might not be in orchestra and who otherwise might not encounter his music or
Mm-hmm.
him. And so through that avenue, I'm thankful that arrangements are being made for bands for those composers' music, which is great. It felt great for me. It felt great to be able to go into a house with a packed audience and play those arrangements and play Kevin Day's music and know that it's impactful and that they're getting paid for their music, their craft, and they're alive to see it
Mm-hmm.
and reap the benefits. It felt great for that to be happening and that it is continuing, and not only continuing but growing. Maybe not at the pace we would like, but it's growing. And I dig it. I'm glad that it's happening. I'm glad that they're continuing to write. I'm glad that there are more names getting uncovered and discovered, and that music is ending up on stands. And oh, by the way, it turns out it's really good.
Yeah. Yeah.
so, so it's a win-win, and I'm
I'm glad.
thankful that it happened while I was able to.
I'm glad you mentioned those arrangements. I didn't think of that, but you're exactly right. I remember the even outside of talking about Black composers, the first time I performed Scheherazade, it was a wind ensemble arrangement, and of course I've performed the orchestral version many times over. But I would put that band arrangement right next to the original orchestration. Not to mention that there are so many historical classical works, quote unquote, that at the end of the day are wind ensemble works. I'm thinking of the piano concerto for wind ensemble and piano by Stravinsky. There's
Mm,
all that wind music by Mozart. There are the Dvorak serenades. So even in a strictly wind context, there is that and I hesitate to say this, but the quote unquote real repertoire for people to to dive into and to get to engage. I know we're a little past the hour. If you have just a few more minutes,
I got all day. However much time you got, I got.
so I wanted to get into your retirement. Um, I will say that I find myself having some tension with the supporting veterans institutions, call this number to support veterans, only because I feel like the government should be doing that. I don't like the idea that somebody can retire from the military, risk their life or however they serve the country, and are just left out to dry. Thrown out to the wolves in that way. I wonder what your retirement is looking like. I know that you are looking for teaching opportunities, I'm sure performance opportunities, but hopefully you are taken care of beyond that in some way, considering your years of service.
Indeed, I served a total of 20 years between the Air Force and the Coast Guard, for which I'm super thankful. Uh, it was such a fantastic opportunity to perform with great musicians, to perform around the world, to be in places that, generationally speaking, my family has never been, and doing things they've never done, uh, to earn a living as a musician. That in and of itself is a whole thing.
Hmm.
But in addition to the former, it was a great career. I'm very thankful. Would I do it again? Absolutely. Um, and to boot, I get a retirement, which is another thing that I would boast to any musician wanting to pursue this, but particularly to some young Black musicians. I was explaining to a group of kids the other day before school let out that I am um, the first on one side of my family, and among the first on another side of my family to retire from anything.
Wow.
It's crazy. I think you talked about this on previous podcasts. How crazy it is that firsts are still occurring
Hmm.
in this age, and I'm among the first in my family to retire, to have a retirement from a career. I'm among the first to graduate college, definitely to have a graduate degree of some kind. Uh, and so having a retirement, there was nobody in my family that could put me on game about that, like what that meant, what to look out for, what to do when you cross these milestones. I'm the first, so I'm figuring it out for my kids, and it's a blessing to have. I'm For as long as the Lord will have me walk in this earth, I am to a degree financially taken care of and have healthcare in place,
That's
which
beautiful.
is an amazing thing to have. I'm so super fortunate, especially with what's going on right now, especially. So I'm very thankful for it. But in addition to that, when musicians retire from the military bands, there are some that are like, I did this for 20, 25, 30 years. I'm gonna hang it up and go do something different. And they earn that. But for me, I was in no way, shape, or form done performing. I can't. It's not in me to be done yet. So I'm back here in my hometown of Houston, and I'm super fortunate to be sliding into some playing opportunities, picking up some gigs, some community orchestras, some big bands, some combos, some church gigs, just some stuff happening. And I'm super thankful because I want to play. That's what I'm about. I want to make the music with any and everybody. I want to teach. I enjoy teaching, and I know that that's not always the case. Some people teach because they have to. I teach because I want to. I enjoy imparting information and watching people grow because I want to pay that back. Because so many people put in on me, helping me to grow and be a musician and person. So I'm trying to sow those seeds uh, to somebody who may never knew that they were going to run into this cat who's going to help change the trajectory of their lives the way people did mine. So and also, I was telling another friend that I haven't touched my suitcase since I got home, for which I'm thankful because military bands are always traveling, always on the road, and so I've enjoyed the time of not opening that suitcase for a little bit. It's been nice.
I'm sure. I'm
I'm sure
sure.
I'll get the itch again soon, but right now I'm good with it. Not opening that suitcase has been great.
So, how can folks in the Houston area or elsewhere get in touch with you, book you, do all the things you're looking to do now that you're retired from the military?
Shamedly, I can't even answer that question. I'm the worst with social media. I should be better, but I just don't. So that is a project I'm currently working on, is how to make the answer to your question accessible and available so that I can be reached and communicated with so that we can get down. Uh, I, but the good old fashioned word of mouth and phone numbers has been great. Last week alone, I got to play 3 jazz gigs, a gig with an African band, and an orchestra concert all in the same week. And I was like, that feels great to be able to diversify my playing that much within 8 days, um, all while still trying to figure out how I'm going to publicize myself and be more readily available.
All right.
So
Well,
I'm working
the
on
folks
it.
will stand by. The folks will stand by so they can get to you. Well, so the last thing I wanted to touch on, we've talked a lot about the unique benefits, the unique responsibilities, some of the challenges of taking the route of a military ensemble. As I'm sure you know, the younger generation, the kids that are 18, 19, 20, 21 years old, you're now are very woke, very progressive, think about things in a very different way on very different planes. Even as I get specifically into the original goal, the original point of this podcast, we're talking about decolonizing classical music, viewing things through a broader framework than just a white Western framework of performance and of classical music. As these conversations and as these realities compare to military ensembles and the opportunities therein, is there work that can be done to shift what military band service looks like on the inside? Or is it just a matter of changing the way that we see this thing that is ultimately going to be very rigid, very what it is, due to the fact that it is an institution of the United States government?
It's both. Again, it's one of those things where multiple things can be true. I don't know if you're aware, in the United States Air Force Band, there are two gentlemen that were hired, I think, in 2022, to be rap artists. That is their job. They serve in the band. It's under the vocalist billet, but they are uh, rap artists, and they're good. Nick Feemster and Lamar Riddick. They If you ever catch them, and it will be random, but if you catch them, it's good to watch. And so that is an example of at least the Army and the Army band career field doing something to try to diversify its visibility, in terms of who is present. But at the same time, one hand washing the other, they are also a very good recruiting tool, because that thing wasn't present before, but now they got these two cats on stage rapping, and that's going to catch somebody's attention, who's going to ask the question and then draw them near to the Army, and then the rest will be history. Um, but at the same time, it's really disheartening to see the backlash that they get just from people's traditional mindsets. I've been at performances with them to see them do their thing, and then hear some veterans talk about, well, that's not my army, or those kinds of things. Or even worse is to hear Black people hate on what they're doing, which is unfortunate because of what they represent. They represent a presence that was not there, and now they're there, and that presence should be applauded and welcomed because of who they're going to reach. But instead, there are many of us who are raining shade on them because, well, maybe they're not rapping the way that they would if they weren't in the military. Make no mistake about it, these cats know what they're doing. They can't come out and say whatever they want to say on a microphone because that's a government microphone. So they're going to do what they do, but they're going to tailor it the right way. And that's what they're supposed to do because that's the task at hand. So there's definitely a dichotomy about what it is, what it looks like, and what kind of change needs to be made. Yes, Change must come from the inside, and we have to get inside to help make that change. So we, should welcome a wider diversity of auditioning and more people coming to the front to come inside to make that change. But yet also, yes, the perspective from the outside also needs to change to help massage that, because many of these ensembles, when they sit down and have their meeting about where to go, their question is, how do we tailor what we're doing to the public? If there is not a public for those rap artists to reach to, then that becomes a non sequitur and it gets removed. And frankly, and I think you had mentioned this in a previous question, uh, it was a difficult thing for me in all of my time in military bands to have the thing in the back of my head that, like, just the old saying, just from people from generations past and even now, like, white man's army. And just to know that in the past and in the present, even, and hopefully less in the future, that there's something about serving in a military that might otherwise treat me a certain way because of who I am. But at the same time, knowing that, look, this is the United States of America is my home. It is my country, and I served it uh, proudly. And so, like any family reunion, you always got the crazy uncle. Every family is messy, but that doesn't mean you don't represent. And so I'm glad that those times that I was the only one I got to represent, because somebody who needed to see that saw it. Those times when I was featured as a soloist, somebody who needed to see that and hear that saw it. They encountered that, and it left its mark, for better or worse. But it left its mark. I'm thankful that I was able to talk to some students and say, listen, I understand your reservations about what military bands are and what we've all been told coming up about the white man's army, so to speak. But in order for that to change, we got to get in the game to change it. And there are many musicians in these military bands who went in and stood up against the very things that need to be fought against. And they caught backlash and they caught reprimand and they got fired and all kinds of things went down, but they went in and they fought. Uh, Shout out to retired Senior Chief James Jackson, who was in the Coast Guard band for 25 years, I think. And man, that dude was always setting stuff on fire because he fought for what was right all the time. And quite frankly, along the way, he just got not liked for it, but he didn't care. He knew what he had to do. And he did that for me. He did that for Tyler, a bassoonist. Tyler Wilkins is a bassoonist in the Coast Guard band. And now since James and I have retired, he's now the only one. And I know he's feeling that, but marching on, he will continue. That thing has to keep going. And so we need to generationally replenish our presence in these ensembles, or else it will just go away. Because no one cares enough about it except us. If Black people stop being in military bands, not many people are going to care. That's just being frank. But we got to be up in there to help make change. It's the same as any professional ensemble anywhere. We have to be in to help make change. Miss Judy Dines with the Houston Symphony, she's been there.
Yep.
I don't know how many years. And I'm glad that she's staying in that chair. I'm sure that from time to time, she's probably considered just leaving because of the mess. But I'm thankful she's still there. Because anytime I go hear that ensemble, I see her and I feel better about it. Because many times she's the only one. And I'm thankful for that. And that's the same case in many military ensembles. But we got to be in the fight. We got to be in the rooms.
Kenneth W. Megan leading the U.S. Coast Guard Band in a performance of Baron Cimetier's Mambo, music by Donald Grantham, who is one of the titans of contemporary wind band literature. If you know, you know. I have to say, putting this opus together and listening to several wind band recordings to decide what I wanted to drop in is making me feel some feels. I have to say, I love where my life has taken me. But boy, what I wouldn't do to be on my way to a professional wind band rehearsal or a professional wind band performance right now as a performer. I certainly do miss that era of my bassooning and my fluting. So maybe I'll have to figure out how to jump back in without joining the military. But yeah, of course, also huge thanks to Cedric for having the chat with me. Always very important for us to get the military musician perspective as we talk about decolonizing classical music. All right, so for today's Trilloquy, I want to sit with something that Cedric was talking about. He mentioned the glaring lack of diversity in military ensembles, but he also pointed out that many young Black musicians out there don't even know that opportunities like those exist. And even if they do know, they often haven't been given the resources or the roadmap to prepare for those opportunities. This industry loves to obsess over excellence and who's the best at the auditions, as if that's the end all be all. And we act as if that audition screen is the great equalizer. But the reality is the filter happens years before anyone steps on a professional stage, especially when you talk about private lessons and just general knowledge of what's out there. I've lived this firsthand. I didn't know about half of the professional opportunities that I could explore until I was well in the field, which was in itself a stroke of fortune and good karma from a former life, because, you know, I feel like there are many reasons why I shouldn't have been able to make it, considering that I didn't take any private lessons until I got to college. So, you know, that the story tells itself. And again, I'm very grateful, but there are so many people who just don't make the cut. It probably wouldn't have worked out for me to join the military, but even for those who are willing to cut their hair or put on a uniform, is not always a clear path as far as what you do once you're there. I think about my own parents and a couple of my siblings who went to the Air Force. It wasn't born out of some quest for glory or some journey to patriotism. It was born from the fact that the military is simply one of the only viable options to get your adulthood going if you don't come from money or if you aren't interested in going to college. Cedric's work to make himself visible in the military, to unapologetically take up space so that young Black musicians know that they have a lane for themselves, is absolutely vital work. And again, more broadly, for people who join the military because that's just what they got to do, it's important for them to see people like Cedric doing what he's doing so that they have a broader perspective on the choice that they've made as well. You know, it also brings me to a conversation I find myself having constantly when I'm out talking to students and giving guest lectures. There's this sort of pervasive myth out there, this damaging idea that a music degree relegates you to one highly specific, rigid track. But the truth is, your options are limitless if you know how to engage your artistry with the broader world. And it's that philosophy that's the absolute core of my work overall, and certainly what I'm doing at the American Composers Forum. When we support and commission artists, we aren't looking for people who just want to create music for its own sake. We're looking to champion creators who actively broaden the narrative. We want artists who engage the real world, the messy, beautiful world we actually live in, that mud that the lotus requires to bloom and be so beautiful. If we want this music and the art of composition to last for another generation, I think we have to change how we frame it, especially as AI starts to take hold of everything. We have to make it undeniably clear that this music lives and breathes as a vital piece of our society. It's not a separate embellishment. It's not an accoutrement for the rich or the elite. It's a part of who we are. Again, as I listen to these wind band recordings, I think about my experiences, the conversations that they inspire, and just the broader life I've been able to live because those composers wrote that music. That's the context that we have to put around this art. When we start treating this art as a reflection of who we are, a reflection of America, a reflection of society and the world, that is when we truly decolonize this thing called classical music. And that's it for today. I got to run to the airport to catch a flight to Minnesota to keep on keeping on, to keep the work going. Thanks again for tuning in, and I'll share another one of these with y'all as soon as I can. Until then, peace.